So hello everybody, and I'm here to talk to you about Bonita BPM 7. I'll present you this new webinar entitled Developer Friendly for Engaging Applications. So here's the agenda for today's presentation. I'll start by presenting you a quick overview of the new features and concepts of Bonita BPM 7. I will not go too much in details on this one because I hope you get the chance to view the first webinar, the recording of the first webinar. Anyway, this presentation will more focus on a live demonstration of all of these features. That's the second point in my agenda. And lastly, I will conclude with some sort of highlights on efficient development methodologies with this new version. There's a couple of things that are going to change in the way we use the tools. And here I want to make sure I give you some pointers on the best practices. All right. So first subject here, I'm going to give you a bit of a tour on the new features and concepts. This is going to be with slides, and later I will be showing them live. Before we go and talk about individual features, I just wanted to share with you one key driver of our new release. This is decoupling. The entire release of Bonita BPM 7 is based on decoupling. We have made our efforts to change a bit the architecture of the tooling in order to have clear separation between business logic on one side, business data on the other, and lastly, user interfaces. The reason why we have decoupled all of these components is to be sure we are aligned with software development best practices and make sure we can maintain and build sustainable applications. So the principle behind here is kind of an old principle in software development. It's called the MVC principle for Model View Controller. So here really the idea is to separate all of these bricks. So for business logics, what's this logic? We have processes, the connectors, the script, the actors, everything which resides on the back end, on this execution engine of Bonita. Then we have the business data. Here I will introduce one of the new features for Community Edition. It's not something new for subscription, but it's pretty new for community. This is called business data model. This powerful feature will help us to leverage business data and manipulate it in our processes and our applications. And lastly, I'll focus also on user interfaces. Here I'll present the new items. Here there's a lot of changes on this particular topic here with the arrival of pages, custom applications, forms, themes, and navigation. Now, in order to see a bit how all of these features that I've listed interact with each other, I have tried to summarize everything in one big picture. So to put it simply, we can divide all of the Bonita BPM application into two main zones here, the backend and the front end. Backend being the server, what is not visible to end users, and the front end being what is visible to end users. Since we're a web application, this is where you play with the software with your browser. So to start with, Bonita BPM is a tool to create processes. So we create processes that are going to be executed on the back end, and we create those processes using the Bonita Studio. So this is nothing new here. There's no big changes in the way you design processes with Bonita BPM 7. You will see that the changes are more on the front end side. So you start by designing processes. Now, one thing that is going to be new for the Community Edition are the PDMs. The PDMs are a new technology that allow us to model business data for our process. The advantage of using PDMs is basically that we isolate business data from processes. We create a dedicated database that you can model with the studio, and that will allow us to store all of our data and allow us to share data across multiple processes and keep it also available beyond the scope of execution of the processes. So you can have easily multiple processes collaborate around the same data. Another interesting features of the BDM is that we provide the tooling to easily manage the data structure and the data requests, the queries to these BDMs without having to have any SQL language. We provide some toolings to generate some Java APIs and REST calls to expose these data models to your application and to your process without having to run those queries. And lastly, the BDMs also quite convenient because they're not bound to a specific SQL database. We use exactly the same technology as we use for the execution engine. We use Hibernate, which is an abstraction framework to deal with data. So this means your PDM that is modeled in the studio will run as well on MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, or whatever database is running JDBC. So that's the big novelty in terms of backend here. Now, all of these elements, the process, the data, all of this needs to be exposed to the front end. And the way we work now to expose anything to the front end is with the REST APIs. The REST APIs are not new. We already had them for some time in version 6. What is being improved is actually the number of functions that are available through those REST APIs. The REST APIs are really clearly now the main focus to switch from backend to front end. So anything you want to do with the PDMs, with the process, from a user interface will need to be done through the REST APIs. Speaking about front end, here that's our major innovation from Bonita BPM 7, the new forms. So prior to that, we already had forms in Bonita 5 and 6, but the forms were not created with the same technology. Here we introduced a new technology based on AngularJS and Bootstrap, which are two cutting-edge frameworks to create web applications. And we have also created a new tool to create those forms. We have created a tool called the UI Designer. This new tool is also browser-based, so it allows you to have a clean WYSIWYG edition. What you see, what you get, you really can see the appearance of your form when you design it. The UI Designer is bundled with the Studio, and so when you want to create your forms, you will create them in an environment which is pretty similar to the ones that you'll use to render your forms. So this is the new form technology. Of course, we have still kept the compatibility with existing forms for our customers who are going to migrate, and our users who are going to migrate from Bonita 6. But this is the new way to go. The new forms here are really much more powerful, and I'll explain why. One of the key aspects also that is related to decoupling is the introduction of an element called a concept, called contracts. Contracts are a concept that allow us to provide decoupling from between the process and the forms. A contract is something that lists a set of input parameters and some validation rules to perform an action on the process. And the actions you can perform on the process are, for example, starting a new case or executing a new task. So each time, basically, you'll have a form in a process to start it or to execute a task. You'll have to fulfill a contract before being able to move anywhere in the process execution. So the contract can act as a good validation tool to make sure you have the proper data on your backend side. And it also allows us to increase the decoupling between the process and the form. If we look back at history, in Bonita 5 and Bonita 6, our forms were directly embedded in our process definitions. So what that meant basically is that when you wanted to update a form, let's say put a capital letter anywhere or change a comma or the slightest modifications you wanted to make to the forms meant you had to redeploy the entire process. And so when you were in production, this was really painful because you had to create a new version of your process, deploy it, put the other one on hold, and do a whole migration scenario to switch to the new forms. Now, with this decoupling, with the contract, we can support scenarios such as live updates of forms in the subscription editions. That means basically that when your process is running into production, you can pick a form of an advanced step anywhere in your process and replace its form with a new one. As long as you respect the same contract as the old form, you will be able to replace at runtime the form. Another aspect of the form is that we have introduced a new tooling that allows you to create custom widgets. Of course, we still provide some out-of-the-box widgets, but this new technology clearly bypasses one of the main limitations of Bonita 5 and 6 forms. Previously, we were not able to create custom forms, so when you were dealing with complex projects with rich user interfaces, you were kind of limited in what you could create to extend the behavior of the out-of-the-box widgets. So we didn't want it to fall into the same issues again with Bonita BPM 7, so we introduced a new tooling that allows us to create custom widgets. It's not too complex. You still need to know a bit of AngularJS, but it's fairly modular and it's easy to maintain. So that's really a big, powerful feature here that will be, I think, seen quite often on the community now. And another interesting thing that we wanted to fix from Bonita 5 and 6 form was the productivity aspect. Often when you created forms in your processes, you had portions of your forms which were repeated over and over again along the process execution. You had some bits of the process that were just showing you some context information about what had been entered before that were being reused. And so to compensate for that, we have introduced the notion of fragments in Subscription Edition. A fragment is basically a pointer to a specific portion of the form. That means you can have in multiple forms a pointer to a single fragment which contains itself some widgets. If you have a request and you have a summary called request details with maybe 10 different widgets, you can put the request details section of your form inside a fragment and you will only have one place to maintain it. Meaning if you want to add an extra information, you just have to modify your fragment and all of your forms using the fragment will benefit from this update. That's really something new here, and believe me, it will save some time in terms of implementation because prior to that, what we had was only a copy-paste mechanism. Here with the fragments, you really have a reference, so it means updating all the copies is no longer an issue. You just have one reference to update. Now, if I just stop there, I would be really fair with our new version. The focus of this new version is to deliver what we call living applications or business applications. So we have extended a bit our area of expertise here to allow our end users to create business applications. We no longer believe in the approach of the generic portal, the generic task inbox with static listings, with things like that. So we allow now our customers to create custom business applications with pages that we can create with the UI designer, just like forms, with default and custom widgets and fragments. The idea behind here is that you're the best person to take the decision on what you need to show to your end users. You know exactly what they expect, you know what business information you need to show in your listings, and you don't want a listing to mix, for example, leave request or procurement request. You don't want to show the same information for those two listings. So now you're able to create different pages, a page for your leave request listings, another page inside of maybe another application for handling procurement requests. So the pages are really something we had in prior versions. We had it. It was introduced in 6.3 for subscription, but it was getting more and more popular. But it was fairly limited in its use because you had to inject it inside an existing Bonita portal. Now, with the concept of application, you can create a subset of a portal with just a navigation menu and a couple of pages. Additionally, for our subscription users, you can also play with the layout of this application. So you can basically fine-tune the way your menu appears, your logo appears, the wrapper around your different pages, and you can also extend the themes. Here for the themes, we did something very nice. We used the Bootstrap themes. So basically, it means you can take profit of any Bootstrap theme and inject it inside your application. It's not something that is specific to Bonita here. It's really something standard. So you don't need to be an expert in CSS or Bootstrap. You can just pick one of the multiple themes on the market that is compatible with Bootstrap, and you can install it in your business application. So that's a bit the highlight for the front end. Now, there's one thing that is missing here, and that's one thing actually made our success from the start, from Bonita 4 and before even. So what made the success of Bonita BPM is its capability to integrate with third-party systems. The way we dealt with that in prior versions was with connectors. So we still support connectors, of course. We believe it's really one of the key features of Bonita BPM. But with the focus on our new user interfaces, we were missing the capability to connect to those third-party systems. So what we did to compensate for that is we created a new feature that allows us to create custom REST API extensions. So you'll be able to, with Bonita BPM 7, to deploy additional bricks with some artifacts to connect to external systems using REST APIs. So they will be sitting next to the out-of-the-box APIs, and you'll be able to create some extension points to connect to external systems. For example, if you want to connect to a web service to get the weather or to connect to an external database, if you don't want to use the BDM feature, you'll be able to create your own REST API extension point to fetch data from external sources. Or if you want to connect, I don't know, to an ECM, electronic content management system, like Alfresco or SharePoint, you'll be able to create a REST API that does just that for you. Of course, all of these REST APIs, the ones that are packaged by default and the ones that you can create, are secured. We made sure of that by providing a flexible security configuration, and you can basically declare which resources a page can access. So you can say this particular page of my application has the right to access to this particular BDM object or to this particular REST API extension. That's something that was built, we built the new features with security in mind. Now, enough talking with the slides here. I'm going to focus now on the product itself. So I'm going to switch to my studio and I'm going to show you all of this live. We'll be playing with the product itself. Right. So here we are now in the Bonita BPM studio, of course version 7. And what I'm showing you right now is a view of a sample process that actually can get from the studio homepage. So if you go back to any studio homepage, you have a set of examples that are provided in any studio homepage. The particular example I'm going to show you is based on the procurement example. I have extended it, so you're not going to get exactly the same thing if you download it, but the process is the same and the way it works is the same. I have just extended it to show a bit more features there. So for those of you who don't know this small procurement process, I'm going to explain a bit how it works. The principle is quite simple. We want to keep it very simple, so it's obviously not a real life example, but it's close enough. So the way this works is you start by specifying a need for a new procurement request, and you select some candidates for suppliers. So you can say I'm going to invite 3 different suppliers to respond to my procurement request. Then in the first step here, the suppliers can reply to the procurement request. We can say, okay, yeah, I have the goods in stock, I can do it for this particular price. So they all get to complete and to provide a quotation. And later on, the person who issued out the procurement request can review the quotations from the suppliers and pick the selected supplier. So that's fairly simple. There are just 3 forms there. The first one on the start and ones for 2 human steps here. But all of this is based on Bonita BPM 7 features. So nothing new for the process modeling. This is exactly the same way you would have designed it in Bonita BPM 5 and 6. What is new here are the features we leveraged. The first feature we leveraged here is the business data model. The business data model was created with our new feature here, BDM. We created 3 different objects to store our business data. The request object that stores the procurement request details. Here you can see the different attributes with different types. And a list of suppliers, it's another object with names and descriptions. And the elements dealing with the set quotations. So we have 3 objects and we have created a database schema. When we deployed this, this created a database and it generated for new a set of default queries that were provided. These queries are exposed within the Java APIs of Bonita, and they're also exposed with the REST APIs when we want to connect and fetch data in the user interfaces, the pages or the forms. Of course, we're free to extend this. We're free to add extra attributes, to write custom queries. We can extend pretty much the way we want. But here, this is just what is done more or less by default. So that's the first thing, the BDM. The next thing I want to share with you are the contracts. As I said, the contracts are a set of elements which are required to execute an action on the process itself. Here I have selected my process pool and I'm looking at the case start contract to instantiate a new instance of my process here. I will need to provide the following inputs. I need to provide a summary for my procurement request, a description, and a list of supplier IDs. If I do not supply these inputs, I will get an error and I will not be able to start the process. Additionally, I can also write some constraints saying, for example, I expect to have at least 5 supplier IDs or 3 supplier IDs, whatever. I can write constraints in GUIScript and the tooling will check for all of the different items in the inputs to be present, and it will also validate the constraints before executing anything on the engine side. We have these contracts defined for every human step. So for example, here on complete quotation, we expect the supplier which completed the quotation to provide an answer on whether yes or no he has accepted the request or he can provide the goods. Then he needs to provide a price and he may also provide some comments. The comments are optional actually, these ones can be empty, but it still needs to be presented to the engine. So this is the way we have decoupled the forms from the process design. We only expect the form to fill this to submit this particular contract information. Let's now see how the forms are created. If I go, for example, I'll take this particular step. If I go in the form here, I will open my UI designer. The UI designer, here it is a new tool to create forms. This is web-based, so here I am in my browser, and it works a bit in the same way the old UI form builder worked. The principle is simple. You have a palette of out-of-the-box widgets on the left side, and just drag and drop your widgets onto the form editor view here. So what is new, however, is that we have custom widgets. Here I have a set of custom widgets. This form this form doesn't show a custom widget. I'll actually show you another form of a custom widget. If I take this particular form here, this is the first form, the case start form. I have a custom widget, for example, here. When I switch to the suitable supplier tab here, I have an example of a custom widget. Here, for example, this widget allows to move elements from one list to another. We believe that's something fairly useful in the context of this particular form, but it's not something everybody would want to use because it's really specific to my design here. So this is an example of a custom widget. The custom widget is created within the UI designer, and you can actually edit it here. All of this is based on AngularJS, and here you can specify the template, the JavaScript logic that allows to move elements from one list to another. You can really configure it the way you want here. I'm not going to explain how to create the custom widget right now. I will talk more about the UI designer and the features when I cover the new webinar dealing with the UI designer. But just to let you know, this is feasible. Here you configure properties, and you can reuse those properties within your page. So if I go back to my widget here, I have generated a custom widget with some custom properties that you can see here. So that's it for the custom widgets. We also have another feature which is quite interesting, and I already talked about it later. This is the fragments. So this particular form is not with a fragment, but if I go back to the other one, here we have a fragment. A fragment, as I said, is a group of different widgets, and in different steps, actually in the complete quotation step and the review quotations step, I will have the same block of information called request details, and expect to show each time the summary, description, creation date, and created by information exactly in the same way. What is going to change in these two forms or what is below, for example. So I had decided to regroup all of these information inside a fragment. And instead of having two copies of the different widgets, I have the fragment that I can edit in one single place. Here now I'm in the fragment editor, and here I can fine-tune my fragment here, and the changes will be reflected in all of my forms that have a reference to my fragment. Another important feature of this new UI designer is that, actually I'm going to show another one, another form again. Let's take this one, for example. Another aspect, interesting aspect of this UI designer is that we can show some data. We can preview our data. So I'm just going to reinitialize my test data. Hold on a second. Here we go. Okay, so I'm just going to reinitialize my data here, and I'm going to hit preview. This will show me the rendered view showing my data as it will appear to my end users. Here we can see exactly the same form, but with data behind. Of course, the end result is even more impressive. I'll show you just after that. But here I can open it. This is an example of a custom pages using my business data and showing out the form. So you have this new preview mode here, which is very, very close to the end results. It wasn't the case with Bonita 5 or 6. There are still some gaps between the preview mode we had and the final appearance of our pages and forms. Here now we're really sticking to what is going to be presented in the end. Another interesting thing we have here in Bonita BPM 7, it's actually for subscription editions, is the capability to adapt our form to different device types. Here, for example, I'm looking at the medium device size. Basically, it's for a laptop, but I could switch to another type of device, for example, a phone here. And here we see we have resized the overall UI. Everything has moved into one column. The only thing that hasn't changed, I haven't configured it myself, are the tables, but the rest is all moved into a single column. Here you can see the difference. Big screen, and here small screen. Everything is resized to fit. And of course, we can still play more with it. We can still fine-tune the appearance of our form. We get a full customization option when we play with a different device size, and we can resize and adapt the width of all of the components. And that's one of the key features of Bootstrap. We leverage responsive forms. So that's it a bit for the tour of the different features of the page editor and fragments and widgets. I will now show you what we produce with this page editor. So I'll just close that, and I will present you the end results, which is a living application. So I will just connect again. This is another environment. And here we're looking at the end result. This is the same page I showed you, but within another environment with more data. This is a living application. Living application is composed basically of a menu. Here we have a menu with 2 items, and it's showing some pages below. The menus are connected to different pages. Here, for example, we get our supplier listing view, and here our procurement request views. In this page below, that's the page we saw just here, this portion of the screen, we have the details about our PDM. So this is really what replaces the old portal. If I can still access, of course, my generic portal, and I'll show you that just to compare it, so you get a sense of what has changed. This was the way we used to represent data in the past. Something very difficult to read and, well, not very interesting for a business user. You were not able to see the difference between multiple cases. It was just a basic listing of tasks. And now we have replaced this because we no longer believe in the generic portal. We still have to provide one, of course, to get started with your design. Now that we allow you to create these kinds of listings, which are way more powerful because you show exactly the information you want. You show exactly the information you want to your end user, and you allow them to make sensible decisions based on what they see. Of course, these PDMs here in this particular page are connected to my process. And for example, here I have selected a request that is still pending for review, and I can link to my process tasks. So here, if I open this, I'm able to see the forms that were showing in my process definition. And I can move forward in my process. I can move here and execute my process steps. All of this is created with the UI designer. Everything from the listings to even the chart here. This is a custom widget which was created using the UI designer. So there's really no limit to what you can do with this new form technology. You can create applications as you want. You can secure those applications, and you can create multiple applications for different needs. One last thing I'll show you before concluding a bit the demonstration is the capability to customize the different components. So here I'm showing you the best theme I can for this particular application, but just to show you how the application is created, we're going to go in the administration section. I'm going to play a bit with the different settings. Our application was created with tools provided in the portal. We have this application menu in the administration section that allow us to fine-tune our application. The application has a different given profile. It has a dedicated URL, so you can give only access to your users to this particular application. And then you can customize its layout. For example, here I have an additional layout to switch to a side menu on the left. Here, if I refresh my application, I will see menu on the left, for example. And I can also play with, for example, one of the themes that have been deployed here. So let's say superhero theme, for example. And I can switch from one theme to another. So these are different features we have for the theme and layout, and then we can customize the pages. Here we have our 2 pages that we created with the UI designer. We have integrated that into our application by adding them, importing them first and then adding them here. We have customized our menu. Then we have the entire application. We can, at any stage, live update our pages. This is true also for Community Edition. So here, for example, if I want to change my page dealing with the supplier listing or procurement request listing, I am free to re-upload a new page that will replace the existing page, and this will get updated directly here when we refresh the page for all users. So it's something very powerful, and it allows to maintain our application throughout time without having any downtime. That's quite convenient. That's it a bit for the demonstration. I'm going to go back now to the slides, and I'll start to move on the next topic. I will give you some highlights now that I have showed you a bit the different features. I will give you highlights on how you can leverage all of these new features and be efficient when you develop your applications and your processes. To start with, I will talk about process. The way you design processes with Bonita BPM 7 is a bit different from the way we designed processes with earlier versions of Bonita. We have a small things that have changed. The overall methodology is still the same, but there's a couple of steps that have been added now due to the new way we designed forms. The first thing to know when you create a process, with Bonita BPM 7 is to model first the default flow. The default flow is actually kind of a straightforward execution flow for the process. It's basically when everything goes right. So your request gets accepted, everything is done in timely manner, everything is perfect, everything is straightforward. You'll see that in the second phase later, you will start to create some extensions, some secondary paths, but first you want to draw the first default flow. To do that, you start by modeling a process diagram with just that particular flow. So it should be something with just a series of steps, which is pretty straightforward. It's more or less a line. And you don't want to care yet about data, forms, or actor. That's the first thing to draw the process model. Then you start to work on your business data. So you create your BDM objects, you define a new structure of your object, your hierarchy, the relationship between those objects, and their attributes. That's the next step. After that, you set up all of the backend processing. So here you want to specify the contracts, you want to declare the instances of your BDMs that you're going to use in your particular processes. You want also to set up all the operations that allow you to update and to query your different BDMs or external information sources, like connectors, for example. Then once you have reached this first step, you're already able to test your process and to execute it. We provide some auto-generated forms that will allow you to have really the minimum information just to test it and to make sure everything goes right on the backend side. Next phase is to start to work on the user interface. As always, the user interface is probably what takes the longer to create. If you want really the perfect result, it will take more time than just setting up the backend. So you start small by just creating some placeholder forms. we have a feature that allows you to generate those forms from the contracts. Of course, you will need to show more information in the end, but you can start to generate placeholder forms from the contracts. Then once you have your placeholder forms, you can start to work on individual forms starting from the placeholders. You can still run it without having all the forms finished, so you're able to test without having the final results. And this can be a good time to involve end users, because you can already collect some feedbacks from them before having to finish the entire forms for your entire process. Then, only then, that's actually one of the last steps, you'll configure the actor mapping. Why is that done so late? Well, simply because when we play with different actors, we waste a lot of time when we try to test things. So that's really something you want to push as late as you can in order not to switch between different users to test. Then once you have done all of these steps, you want to consider, you have already, of course, a first stable version, you want to consider the alternate paths, the secondary flows, and you want to iterate basically on the previous steps to add your particular exceptions. For example, if a task is not submitted within a given time, then I need to escalate it. Or if my request gets rejected, I need to take these extra steps. All of these are secondary flows on your process, and you need to add them to your basic process. And lastly, the things you can do also is use the live update feature if you're working with subscription edition, or redeploy your process definition to update your form with richer versions. Again, I want to emphasize on that. Do not wait to have the perfect process. Try to have a first version, be agile. Try to have a first version that is runnable, but may not yet contain every possible information in your forms, but it's still testable, and you want to submit that to a set of test users, and you want to guarantee that you're working in the right direction. Don't wait until you have a full process built. You have spent 2 months to create it, but it's not really doing what your end users expect. So that's the power of this new tooling. We can live update the forms, or we can update the forms without changing too much the process definition. So I suggest that you leverage that to create iterations in the way you create your processes. Now, we're going to use also live updates for the next particular topic here. I'm going to talk now about how you implement business applications. So now that you have some processes, maybe not all finished, you can also start without having finished all your process. You can create business applications. The first thing to do is to create some placeholder pages. So you can create just a page with just, let's say, a title. You don't need even to go further. You can just create the title page. Then you can create an application that uses these title pages, placeholder pages, and you can deploy this application. Once your application is deployed, there's a URL that is assigned to you, just like my procurement application, and you can use after that the UI designer to implement your pages starting from the placeholders. You can add PDMS views, tables, for example, that you can filter search on. You can also add links to your processes to execute steps or to start a new process. And then finally, you can live update individual pages in your application. And this is true for all Bonita BPM editions. So you start with a small application, and then you can enrich, you can build a sustainable living application by redeploying pages one by one and extending what they do. That's really the way to work, and this is really what is needed to do to complete an agile approach. You can iterate on that to enrich the pages, redeploy them, ready to have several iterations on the way you create applications. So this is it for the general best practices in terms of implementation. It's now sadly time for me to conclude. During this webinar, I have shown you the different concepts and features of Bonita BPM. I have shown them, of course, on the theoretical aspect, and I have also demonstrated them live by showing you the product. I have also shown you the tools that allow you to create business applications and their processes. And lastly, I gave you some highlights on the best practices to create processes and applications. Before opening for the questions, I'll just finish by giving you some extra resources that are going to help you to start with Bonita BPM 7. The first thing I want to share with you, well, is the previous webinar. You should already have received a link to it in the invitation of this webinar. We We had in the past a webinar called Bonita BPM 7, Creating Engaging, Easily Modifiable Application. The recording of this webinar is already available on our website. This is just a set of half an hour webinar showing the different features and explaining what is new compared to the earlier edition of Bonita. This webinar itself will be made available soon. We have recorded it, so we'll share it with you guys soon. Just need a bit of time to put it on the website. Then I want to also give you highlights on the next webinar that is to come. On the 23rd of July, at that same time actually, on 10 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, I'll be showing the UI Designer. So I'll be giving out a new webinar explaining really how to use the UI Designer from a technical standpoint. So I'll explain all the tricks and giving you tips on how to create custom widgets, how to use fragments, really how to leverage this new tool to create pages and forms. And lastly, for the other remaining points here, I can highlight again the examples. So if I go back to my Studio homepage, just to give you an idea of where you can find them. In any Studio homepage, you can find the examples again. Don't hesitate to test them. Again, the example I showed was the procurement example. The one you're going to get from this homepage is not exactly the same, but it's pretty close to it. You have also the vacation management and the expense report. Additionally, you have another resource which is, I think, quite important and gives you really a lot of information how to use the product, are the getting started videos. We have created a set of videos that explain really how to start to create a process, how to use the UI Designer, how to create contracts. I suggest that you take a look at those videos, watch them in the right order, and it will really help you to start creating a process, create PDMS, and create the forms associated to them. Of course, we're still in the process of shooting those videos, so there will be more videos to come, and we'll probably create getting started section on the website. So stay tuned for more videos on the getting started. Last two resources I want to share with you before opening up for questions are the documentation and the community. These are the same URLs as before. There's a whole effort, a big effort that has been made on documentation. We're still adding more, of course. Nothing is perfect, but we're pretty much confident we'll cover all of the different points here. And lastly, the community. If you have questions, if you want to learn a bit more about Bonita BPM 7 and try to achieve some specific use case, don't hesitate to ask your questions on the community. There are a lot of people that are gonna help you and assist you creating custom widgets or using the best features. All right, so I really want to thank you for following. I hope you have learned a lot about Bonita BPM 7, and I also hope to see you in the next webinar talking about the UI Designer. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Goodbye.